In May 2025, Columbia University faced a dramatic turning point and was once again thrust into the national spotlight when student activists occupied the historic Butler Library, which triggered an unprecedented response involving the NYPD. This conflict at Columbia has drawn notable attention from politicians, media, public figures, and more across the spectrum. Welcome back to Humanitas Academia, where I cover various aspects of college and university education. Thank you for joining me as we explore this recent development at Columbia University. I've covered a number of events at Columbia over the last few months, and the videos are linked below so you can catch up on some of the most recent significant developments. But now let's begin with the most recent developments as of May 2025. Earlier this year, a prominent activist, Mahmoud Khalil, was arrested at Columbia, which resulted in Columbia having to release various public statements, and the university was under significant federal scrutiny. The Trump administration had alleged that Columbia University had tolerated antisemitism and allowed dangerous activism to take place on campus during the 2023-2024 campus student protests that made national news. In mid-March 2025, the Department of Education, under guidance of the Trump administration, took the extraordinary step of withholding $400 million in federal grants from Columbia to compel action. The government issued an ultimatum: enact a series of reforms to quell campus protests that many had perceived as ripe with anti-Jewish sentiment, or lose all federal funding. This was viewed by some as an attack on institutional autonomy, but it did put Columbia in a bind. By the end of March, Columbia had an interim president, Dr. Katrina Armstrong, which announced that the university would yield to most of the federal demands. In a letter outlining these various policy changes, Columbia agreed to overhaul its protest policies and administrative oversight. Key measures included banning face masks at campus demonstrations, the prohibition of protesters from occupying inside academic buildings, and the additional hiring of special campus safety officers that would have additional arrest powers. These measures were clearly implemented to prevent protesters from concealing their identity, to no longer tolerate occupations of libraries or classrooms or offices for demonstrations, and to revise the disciplinary procedures so that protest disruptions could be dealt with swiftly if demonstrations devolved into targeted harassment and abuse. From my research, it seems that Columbia also agreed to adopt a new definition of antisemitism campus-wide. These changes were imposed as a precondition for restoring federal funds, and were almost exactly what the Trump administration had demanded. Columbia portrayed these concessions as necessary steps to protect students and to keep the university's research enterprise funded, and interim President Armstrong wrote that while the measures were not the outcome Columbia wanted, they were taken to ensure campus safety and to maintain academic integrity. Since these changes, student activism at Columbia has not ceased. In fact, you could argue that it has been intensified in some respects. By late April and early May, protests flared up again, which directly tested Columbia's newly declared policies. The most dramatic confrontation occurred on May the 7th, 2025, when a group of pro-Palestinian student activists occupied Columbia's Butler Library in an open challenge to the ban on indoor protests. That Wednesday afternoon, a group of protesters came into Butler Library's main reading room. Once inside, they announced that they were taking over the space for a peaceful protest. The activists renamed the room the Basel al-Araj Popular University, after a Palestinian scholar and activist, as a symbolic gesture. Some stood on desks with bullhorns, some led chants, others hung banners. One banner read, "Strike for Gaza." They passed out pamphlets demanding that Columbia divest from companies profiting from the war in Gaza. This occupation seemed highly organized. Students locked arms, they formed a human chain. They declared that they would remain in the library in solidarity with Gaza and in protest of Columbia's recent actions. This action immediately tested Columbia University's administration. This protest was in direct defiance of the recently implemented rules. Officials went to the Butler Library as the standoff began, and throughout the afternoon and evening, the university attempted multiple steps to defuse the situation without immediately resorting to the police. Campus safety officers were sent in to warn the students that they were trespassing and that they were violating campus policy. The protesters, however, refused to show their IDs or leave when ordered. Tensions rose as security officers and protesters interacted, and the university reported that 2 public safety officers were injured in the scuffle. By 6 p.m., the occupation was still ongoing. Columbia sent an emergency alert to all students stating that Butler Library was closed and it must be cleared immediately. When the protesters still did not disperse, Columbia made the call to the NYPD. Around nightfall, police and riot gear entered the library's second-floor reading room to end the occupation. Videos posted by students on social media showed offers filing past rows of bookshelves toward the seated protesters, who continued to chant things like, "We have nothing to lose but our chains." The officers informed the demonstrators that they were trespassing and began to make arrests when the students refused to move. Some protesters went limp and they had to be carried out, others were handcuffed with zip ties, while outside Butler Library, additional students and allies had gathered in support. By the end of the night, the NYPD reported multiple individuals were arrested. The Columbia Daily Spectator student newspaper counted about 75 students arrested during this operation. Those arrested were apparently loaded onto a bus, and they were taken to a local precinct, and onlookers recorded with their phones. This is one of the largest mass arrests on Columbia's campus in recent memory, and after clearing the library, the acting president walked through the now empty reading room and described what she saw. She said the historic room had been defaced and damaged in disturbing ways, with graffiti or flyers, and with disturbing slogans written around. She called the occupation utterly unacceptable, emphasizing that while Columbia did support free speech, it unequivocally rejects antisemitism and other forms of harassment and discrimination. In her eyes, the protest had crossed the line from expression into disruption and vandalism. The fallout from this protest was significant. Columbia University initiated disciplinary proceedings against the participants, in addition to the legal charges they faced for trespassing. The administration made it clear that students who violated the protest rules will be suspended or even expelled. This firm response was intended to demonstrate to federal authorities and concerned donors that Columbia would enforce order on campus. On the other hand, activists viewed the heavy-handed crackdown as proof of the university's alignment with the Trump administration's agenda. They noted that Rubio wasted no time reacting. That very night, Rubio announced via social media that the government was reviewing the visa status of the trespassers and vandals who took over Columbia's library, calling the occupiers pro-Hamas thugs and declaring that they were no longer welcome in our great nation. The Butler Library incidents thus underscored how tightly intertwined campus events and national politics has become. A protest in a campus library drew responses from the U.S. Secretary of State and the New York governor. The Trump administration's stance has been clear and unapologetic. Trump and his officials have repeatedly framed Columbia's protests as part of a larger problem of campus radicalism that they are determined to crush. However, it is not just Republicans that supported this action. New York's mayor, Eric Adams, a Democrat, supported Columbia's handling of the library incident. He called the students' actions irresponsible and emphasized that rules must be followed, effectively backing the use of police on campus. The governor, also a Democrat, balanced her remarks by acknowledging the right to protest, but condemning any form of violence or vandalism, applauding law enforcement's handling of the situation. But of course, not all public officials agree on the best course of action here. The issue of what constitutes anti-Semitism versus legitimate criticism of Israel is a hotly debated topic. Columbia's 2023-2024 protest saw incidents that alarmed many, and some feel that more severe actions are needed in order to curb anti-Semitism on campus. Columbia has also become emblematic of a broader national free speech versus hate speech debate. Some newspapers condemn Trump's administration's use of immigration law against Mahmoud Khalil as dangerously authoritarian. Comparisons have been drawn to McCarthyism or even the Chinese Cultural Revolution for the targeting of academics specifically. On the other hand, other commentators have applauded the firm's stance, arguing that universities have been too lenient on what they characterized as extremist anti-Jewish activity that masquerades as activism. Many universities are watching closely to what happens at Columbia because Trump has warned more than 60 campuses about their own handling of anti-Semitism and that they could face similar ultimatums. In sum, the public commentary regarding Columbia reflects broader social divide. The case has become a bit of a Rorschach test. Those most concerned about rising anti-Semitism see Columbia's prior environment as untenable, whereas free speech advocates see the Mahmoud Khalil case and the most recent Butler Library case as a canary in the coal mine, a warning of government overreach into academia and the stifling of free speech in the First Amendment. Both of these views have gotten significant airtime, and a broad cultural debate is going on. The recent turmoil at Columbia University captures a moment of reckoning in American higher education. This turmoil is a microcosm of a broader discussion taking place in American society that affects much more than simply a single university. In the span of months, we have seen a significant amount of discussion and tests against the First Amendment in relation to public activism. It illuminates the tensions in a post-2024 America between national security narratives and the voices of dissent on campus. And thus Columbia finds itself as a microcosm of a broader social, cultural clash. Thus the conversation here is reverberating far beyond Columbia's campus and will likely influence how universities and the society at large navigates the challenges of free speech protests for years to come. Stay tuned to Humanitas Academia, as I will certainly cover more in this saga as events continue to unfold, as I'm sure they will. Thank you very much for listening and for your ongoing support.